I opened the DNA test results on my laptop at 11:47 p.m. on Christmas Eve, and 32 years of my life became a lie. The screen showed a match probability of 0% between me and the man I'd called Dad my entire life. Rachel Morrison, 32 years old, senior data analyst at Predictive Solutions, Inc., sitting alone in my childhood bedroom while my family slept downstairs, staring at numbers that didn't make sense until suddenly they made perfect sense. My hands didn't shake. My breathing stayed even. I'd spent a decade analyzing data, finding patterns in chaos, and right then, every strange detail from my childhood clicked into place like a spreadsheet formula finally calculating correctly. The DNA kit had been a joke gift from my sister Emily at our family's Christmas Eve celebration earlier that evening. She'd wrapped it in shiny red paper with a bow, laughing about how we could finally prove which one of us inherited Grandma Morrison's supposed Cherokee ancestry. Everyone thought it was funny. Mom had gone pale for just a second, but I'd attributed it to the wine. Dad had made a joke about not wanting to know if he was related to Uncle Frank. We'd all laughed. I'd activated the kit right there at the dinner table, swabbed my cheek, sealed it in the prepaid envelope, and thought nothing more about it. What I hadn't mentioned was that I'd already sent in a test 3 weeks earlier through a different company, 23andMe, because I'd been curious about health predispositions after a coworker was diagnosed with a genetic condition. The 23andMe results had come back that afternoon. I'd opened them on my phone in the bathroom during dessert, expecting to see confirmation of family connections and maybe some interesting ethnicity percentages. Instead, I saw a close family match to someone named Richard Chen, listed as a predicted first cousin or half-sibling. I didn't have any first cousins named Richard Chen. I didn't know anyone named Richard Chen. But the genetic markers didn't lie, and I knew enough about DNA testing from my work in data analysis to understand what a 50% match meant. Either I had a secret sibling, or one of my parents wasn't my biological parent. I'd gone back to the table, finished my pumpkin pie, smiled through the rest of the evening, and excused myself to bed early, claiming a headache. Nobody questioned it. I was the quiet one, the analytical one, the daughter who'd always been more comfortable with numbers than people. They expected me to retreat when overwhelmed. What they didn't expect was that I'd spend the next 6 hours cross-referencing public records, social media profiles, and genealogy databases to build a complete picture of exactly how my life had been a carefully maintained fiction. Richard Chen was 45 years old, lived in Sacramento, California, and worked as a civil engineer. His profile picture showed a man with Asian features, dark hair graying at the temples, and a smile that looked oddly familiar. We shared 50% of our DNA, which meant we were half-siblings, same mother or same father. I pulled up photos of my mother, Helen Morrison, blonde hair and blue eyes, German and Irish ancestry according to every family story I'd ever been told. Then I pulled up photos of myself, dark hair that Mom always said came from Dad's Italian side, brown eyes that didn't match either parent's blue, a face that I'd always been told looked like Mom's grandmother, though now that I studied old family photos with analytical precision, I couldn't see the resemblance at all. I created a spreadsheet because that's what I did when things got complicated. Column A, Richard Chen's information. Column B, my information. Column C, Dad's information, the man who'd raised me, loved me, taught me to ride a bike, and helped me with calculus homework. James Morrison, 58 years old, blonde hair, blue eyes, Scotch-Irish ancestry. The numbers didn't add up. They never had, I realized. I just hadn't been looking for the discrepancy. I searched for Richard Chen's family on social media. His mother was listed as Helen Morrison Chen, deceased 2019. But that was impossible because my mother Helen was downstairs sleeping in her bedroom. Then I found the obituary. Helen Morrison Chen, beloved mother of Richard Chen and survived by her husband David Chen, born in Portland, Oregon in 1960. My mother was born in Portland in 1960. The obituary included a photo. It wasn't my mother, but there was something in the bone structure, the set of the eyes. Could they be related? Sisters? I searched for Helen Morrison, Portland, Oregon, 1960, and found records for 3 women with that name. One of them was my mother, Helen Morrison Whitfield, who had married James Morrison in 1988. I dug deeper. Portland High School yearbooks from 1978, available online through a digitization project. I found my mother, young and smiling, captain of the debate team. 3 pages later, I found Helen Morrison Chen, different girl, similar name, yearbook photo showing her with the drama club. Not sisters, just 2 girls with the same common name in the same city. Dead end. I went back to Richard Chen's DNA matches on the 23andMe database. There were others, distant cousins and third cousins, all with Chinese surnames. I clicked through their family trees, public profiles, whatever I could access without contacting anyone. Then I found him, David Chen, listed as Richard's father, 70 years old, retired architect. His profile showed he'd lived in Portland in the 1980s and early 1990s before moving to Sacramento. His company had designed several buildings downtown that I recognized. I searched for his name in conjunction with my mother's. Nothing, no obvious connection. But the DNA didn't lie, and I had a half-brother with Chinese ancestry, which meant somewhere in my genetic code was a parent I'd never known about. I pulled up my baby photos. I'd been born in May 1991. I did the math backward, conceived in August 1990. I searched my mother's history from that time. She'd worked as a secretary at Morrison and Associates architecture firm, Dad's family business. Dad's father had founded it, and Dad had taken over in 1985. I found old articles about the firm, archived web pages, employee directories from historical business registrations. In 1990, Morrison and Associates had merged with Chen Design Group. The combined firm had operated for 2 years before splitting again in 1992. The principal of Chen Design Group had been David Chen. There it was, the connection. My mother had worked at the firm during the exact time David Chen's company had merged with it. She'd been 29 years old, Dad had been 32, they'd been married for 2 years, no children yet, though I knew from family stories that they'd been trying. Mom had mentioned once that they'd considered fertility treatments before I came along, their little miracle baby. Not a miracle, an affair. I felt nothing in that moment except the cool satisfaction of solving a complex problem. The emotional weight would come later, I knew, but right then, I was purely analytical. I had data, I had evidence, I had patterns that created an undeniable conclusion. My mother had an affair with David Chen during the merger. She'd gotten pregnant, she'd passed me off as Dad's child, and no one had questioned it because DNA testing wasn't common in 1991. By the time it became available, everyone already knew I was James Morrison's daughter. Why would they test? I spent the rest of the night documenting everything. I created a detailed timeline with sources cited, saved screenshots of profiles and public records, printed the DNA results, and highlighted the key markers. I organized it all in a folder, both digital and physical. I wasn't sure what I'd do with the information yet, but I knew I needed it preserved, protected, indisputable. This was my life, my identity, and someone had stolen it from me by lying for 32 years. At 6 a.m., I heard people stirring downstairs, Christmas morning. I'd planned to sleep in, maybe join everyone for brunch around 10. Instead, I'd spent the entire night unraveling my existence. I was tired, but wired, running on adrenaline and the kind of focused energy I usually reserved for major projects at work. I took a shower, changed clothes, applied makeup to hide the lack of sleep. I looked at myself in the mirror and tried to see David Chen in my features. The dark hair, the brown eyes, the shape of my face. Maybe, probably, definitely. I went downstairs with my laptop and the printed folder. The house smelled like coffee and cinnamon rolls. Mom was in the kitchen, Dad was reading the newspaper in his recliner, Emily was on the couch scrolling through her phone. My brother Andrew and his wife Jennifer were supposed to arrive at 9 with their kids. Uncle Frank and Aunt Marie would come around 10. We'd open presents, eat too much food, and pretend to be a normal, happy family. Except we weren't. We were built on a lie. "Merry Christmas, sweetheart," Mom said when she saw me. "You're up early. Feeling better?" I couldn't sleep, I said truthfully. I need to talk to you and Dad, now, before everyone else gets here. Something in my tone made her set down her coffee mug. Dad looked up from his newspaper. Emily glanced over, curious but not yet alarmed. "What's wrong?" Dad asked. "Living room, both of you. Emily, this involves you too." My voice was steady, controlled. I'd practiced this moment in my head for the past hour. We sat down. Mom and Dad on the couch, Emily in the armchair, me standing because I needed the physical advantage, the position of power. I opened my laptop and turned it toward them. "I got my DNA results back," I said, "from 23andMe, the test I took 3 weeks ago." Mom's face went white. Dad looked confused. Emily leaned forward, interested. "According to the genetic markers, Dad is not my biological father." I let that sit for a moment. "I have a 50% DNA match with a man named Richard Chen in Sacramento. He's my half-brother, which means one of my biological parents is David Chen, a 70-year-old retired architect who used to work with Dad." The silence was absolute. Dad's newspaper slid from his hands to the floor. Emily's mouth fell open. Mom closed her eyes. "Rachel," Mom started. "I spent all night researching," I continued, pulling up the spreadsheet on my screen. "David Chen's firm merged with Morrison and Associates in 1990. You worked there as a secretary. I was conceived in August of 1990 during that merger. The firm split in 1992, and the Chens moved to Sacramento shortly after. Convenient timing." Dad turned to look at Mom. His face had gone from confused to devastated in the span of seconds. "Helen?" Mom opened her eyes. There were tears, but I felt no sympathy. She'd had 32 years to tell the truth. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "You're sorry?" Dad's voice cracked. "You're sorry? Rachel is 32 years old, Helen. 32 years you've let me believe—" He couldn't finish the sentence. Emily was crying now too, shocked and overwhelmed. I remained standing, calm, watching the family I'd known disintegrate in real time. This was data, revealing truth. This was lies collapsing under the weight of evidence. This was what happened when someone tried to maintain a false narrative and forgot that eventually technology would catch up. "Does David Chen know?" I asked Mom directly. "Does he know I exist?" Mom shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "No, it was one time, Rachel. One terrible mistake. The merger was stressful. Your father and I were fighting about fertility treatments. I was weak and stupid, and I've regretted it every single day since." "One time?" Dad's voice was rising. "You got pregnant from one time?" "I didn't know at first," Mom said, her words tumbling out desperately. "By the time I realized, the merger had fallen apart and David's firm was leaving. I never told him. I never told anyone. And then you were born, and you were perfect, and James loved you so much, and I convinced myself it didn't matter." "It didn't matter?" I heard my voice getting sharper despite my efforts to stay controlled. "My entire identity doesn't matter? Medical history doesn't matter? The fact that half my genetic code comes from a stranger doesn't matter?" "You're my daughter," Dad said, but he was looking at me with devastated eyes. "You'll always be my daughter, Rachel. This doesn't change that." "It changes everything," I said. I pulled out the printed folder and handed it to him. Complete documentation, DNA results, public records, timeline, everything. I thought you should have the facts before you decide what to do next. Dad took the folder with shaking hands but didn't open it. He just stared at Mom. 32 years, Helen. 32 years of lies. Emily was sobbing now, and I felt a flash of guilt for doing this on Christmas morning, for destroying her holiday along with everyone else's. But when was the right time to reveal that your entire family history was fiction? There wasn't a good time. There was only the truth, and the consequences of truth, and the reality that some lies were too big to maintain once exposed. "I'm going to contact David Chen," I said. "I'm going to tell him he has a daughter. He deserves to know, even if Mom decided he didn't 32 years ago." "Rachel, please." Mom stood up, reaching for me. Please don't. It will destroy his family. He has a wife, a son, grandchildren. They don't know anything about this. That's not my problem, I said coldly. You made choices that affected my life without my consent. I'm making choices now that affect yours. Fair is fair. I walked out of the living room and went back upstairs to my room. Behind me, I heard Dad's voice, low and angry, saying things I couldn't quite make out. Emily's crying continued. Mom was trying to explain, to apologize, to somehow make 32 years of deception acceptable. I closed my door and sat down at my laptop. I had work to do. Finding David Chen's contact information took less than an hour. He had a professional website for his architectural consulting business, even though he was supposedly retired. There was an email address, a phone number, a business address in Sacramento. I drafted an email, professional and direct. No emotional manipulation, no drama, just facts. I attached a copy of my DNA results and a photo of myself. Subject line, important family matter requiring your attention. I didn't send it immediately. Instead, I called my best friend Jessica, a family law attorney in Seattle. It was Christmas morning, but she answered on the third ring, probably expecting a holiday greeting. Jess, I need legal advice, I said. Hypothetically, if someone discovers their mother committed paternity fraud 32 years ago, what are their options? There was a pause. Rachel, this isn't hypothetical, is it? No. I explained the situation while she listened without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Legally, you don't have many options, she finally said. Paternity fraud isn't a crime in most states, and Oregon doesn't have specific laws about it. Your dad could potentially sue your mom for emotional distress or fraud, but after 32 years, statute of limitations might be an issue. As for you personally, you're an adult. You can contact your biological father, but he has no legal obligation to you. You can get your birth certificate amended if you can prove paternity through DMA, but that's a complicated process. What about child support, back payments? Again, statute of limitations. And honestly, your dad is the one who raised you. He's your legal father. Courts generally don't look favorably on trying to change that retroactively when you're an adult who is well provided for. So, essentially, there are no consequences for what my mother did? Jessica sighed. The consequences are your family falling apart, Rachel. That's not nothing. But legal consequences? Probably not. I'm sorry. I thanked her and hung up. The law wouldn't give me justice, but I didn't need the law. I had information, evidence, and the ability to control the narrative. I sent the email to David Chen. Then I sent a follow-up email to Richard Chen through the 23andMe platform, introducing myself and explaining the situation. I was methodical, thorough, creating a paper trail that couldn't be ignored or denied. Downstairs, I heard raised voices. Dad and Mom were still fighting. The doorbell rang, probably Andrew arriving with his family. I heard Emily trying to explain something, her voice high and strained. I stayed in my room and continued working. I created a document outlining everything I knew, everything I'd discovered, with citations and evidence. I saved it in multiple locations, cloud storage and local drives. This was my truth, and I'd protect it the way my mother should have protected my right to know my own origins. Andrew came upstairs an hour later and knocked on my door. Rachel, Emily said something about DNA tests. What's going on? I let him in and showed him everything. Andrew was 4 years older than me, always the protective big brother, and watching his face as he processed the information was like watching Dad's reaction all over again. Shock, denial, anger, and finally a kind of resigned sadness. Mom cheated on Dad, he said flatly, and you're not his biological daughter. Correct. Does that mean He stopped, realizing the implications. We were half-siblings, not full siblings. We shared a mother, but not a father. We're still family, I said, softer than I'd intended. This doesn't change how I feel about you or Emily. That was the question I'd been avoiding. I looked at Andrew and saw genuine concern. He was worried about Dad, about me, about all of us. I don't know yet, I admitted. He's the only father I've ever known. But he's also been living with Mom's lie, maybe without knowing it. I need time to process. Andrew nodded. For what it's worth, I think you did the right thing. Secrets like this, they poison everything. Better to know the truth. He left and I heard him go back downstairs. The arguing had stopped, replaced by low conversation and occasional crying. I imagined Andrew explaining to Jennifer, Emily calling her fiancé, everyone trying to figure out what this meant for the family going forward. Christmas was ruined, that much was certain. But Christmas was one day. The truth was forever. David Chen responded to my email 6 hours later. His message was brief and shocked. He asked if we could talk on the phone. I called him immediately, my finger hovering over the record button, because I wanted documentation of everything, but ultimately deciding that was too invasive even for me. The conversation lasted 43 minutes. He was stunned, apologetic, overwhelmed. He admitted to a brief affair with my mother during the merger, something he'd regretted for decades. He'd never known about me. His wife didn't know about the affair. Richard didn't know he had a half-sister. I don't want to destroy your family, I told him, but I needed you to know I exist. I needed to understand where I came from. I understand, he said, his voice heavy. Rachel, I don't expect you to forgive me or your mother for what we did. But I want you to know, if I'd known about you, I would have been there. I would have taken responsibility. Would you have left your wife? He was quiet. I don't know, but I would have supported you financially, emotionally, whatever you needed. You deserved that. We exchanged contact information. He promised to tell his family, to introduce me to Richard if I wanted. He asked about my life, my job, my interests. We talked like strangers, because that's what we were. Two people connected by genetics, but nothing else. When we hung up, I felt hollow. I'd gotten answers, but answers didn't fill the void of 32 years of false identity. Richard Chen contacted me the next day through 23andMe. His message was warm, curious, and welcoming. He said his father had told him everything, and while he was shocked, he was excited to have a sister. He shared photos of his family, his 2 daughters, his wife. He asked if we could meet sometime, maybe after the holidays when everything settled down. I agreed, feeling slightly less hollow. I had a brother. Not Andrew, who I'd always known, but Richard, who shared my actual blood. Christmas Day ended with my family scattered. Dad left and stayed at Uncle Frank's house. Mom locked herself in the bedroom. Emily went home early with her fiancé. Andrew and Jennifer took their kids and left after an awkward, silent dinner of reheated ham and untouched side dishes. I stayed in my childhood bedroom, surrounded by evidence of a life that now felt like it belonged to someone else. All my achievements, my diplomas, my photos, they were real, but they were built on a foundation of lies. The next few days were a blur of family meetings, conversations, and confrontations. Dad met with a divorce attorney. Mom begged him to reconsider, swearing that the affair meant nothing, that she loved him, that their marriage was real even if the circumstances of my conception weren't. Dad listened with dead eyes and told her he needed space to think. Emily called me crying, saying she felt like she didn't know who anyone was anymore. Andrew tried to mediate, to find some way to hold the family together, but even he admitted it seemed impossible. I went back to work after New Year's, grateful for the distraction. My colleagues noticed I was quieter than usual, more withdrawn, but nobody pushed. I threw myself into a major project analyzing predictive models for client retention, finding comfort in numbers that made sense, patterns that were logical and explainable. At night, I video called with Richard Chen, getting to know my half-brother, learning about our shared genetic traits, our similar analytical minds, our matching sarcastic humor. He was kind and patient, never pushing too hard, always giving me space to process. I met David Chen in person in February. He drove up to Portland for the weekend, and we had coffee at a cafe downtown. It was awkward and emotional. He looked at me with a mixture of guilt and wonder, seeing his own features reflected in my face. We talked for hours about his life, my life, the paths we'd taken. He was a good man, I realized, Flawed, but decent. He'd made a mistake 32 years ago, and it had created me. And he didn't know how to feel about that. Neither did I. Mom tried to apologize multiple times. Long letters, tearful phone calls, showing up at my apartment unannounced. I listened politely and maintained distance. I wasn't ready to forgive, maybe never would be. She'd robbed me of choices, of identity, of medical history and cultural connection. She'd lied to Dad, to me, to everyone for 32 years because it was convenient, because it allowed her to maintain her perfect family image. I understood her reasoning intellectually, but emotionally, I couldn't find sympathy. Dad was the hardest. He reached out in March, asking if we could have dinner. We met at his favorite restaurant, the one where he used to take me for good report cards when I was a kid. He looked older, tired, defeated. "I don't know how to do this," he admitted over appetizers we both barely touched. "You're my daughter, Rachel. I changed your diapers, taught you to ride a bike, helped you with homework, walked you down the aisle at your college graduation. But every time I look at you now, I see her lie. I see him. And I don't know how to separate you from what was done to me." "I'm sorry," I said, and I meant it. "I'm sorry she did this to you, to both of us." "It's not your fault." He reached across the table and took my hand. "None of this is your fault. You're the victim here as much as I am. Are we going to be okay?" I asked quietly. He squeezed my hand. "I don't know. I want to be. You're still my daughter, always will be. But I need time to figure out what that means now." We left it there, uncertain, painful, honest. Over the following months, Dad and I rebuilt slowly. Dinners once a month, phone calls when we felt strong enough, carefully avoiding topics that were too raw. He moved forward with the divorce. Mom fought it initially, then accepted it when her attorney explained she had no leverage. The proceedings were quiet and civil. They split assets, sold the house, divided their lives after 35 years of marriage, all because of a secret Mom thought she could keep buried forever. Emily struggled the most with the fallout. She'd always been the emotional one, the one who valued family unity above everything. The revelation shattered her worldview. She went to therapy, started taking anxiety medication, postponed her wedding because she couldn't imagine walking down the aisle with our family in ruins. I felt guilty about that, about destroying her happiness along with everyone else's. But I also knew I'd made the right choice. Secrets that big don't stay buried. They rot from the inside out, poisoning everything around them. I met Richard's family in April. His wife, Grace, was welcoming and kind. His daughters were curious and sweet. They treated me like family immediately. No judgment, no hesitation. It was strange and wonderful to be part of a genetic family that actually wanted to know me. Richard and I discovered we both loved hiking, both had the same methodical approach to problem solving, both made the same terrible puns that drove our respective families crazy. Genetics weren't everything, but they were something. And finding that connection helped fill the void Mom's lies had created. A year after that Christmas Eve revelation, I had coffee with Mom. She'd asked to meet, and I'd finally agreed. She looked older too, worn down by guilt and consequences. She'd moved to a small apartment across town, was seeing a therapist, had quit her job because everyone at the firm knew what had happened, and the judgment was unbearable. "I don't expect you to forgive me," she said before I could speak. "I know what I did was unforgivable. I was selfish and cowardly, and I've destroyed everything good in my life because of it." "Yes," I agreed simply. "But I need you to know that even though you weren't planned, even though the circumstances were terrible, you were loved. From the moment you were born, you were so loved. By me, by your dad, by everyone. That was real, Rachel. Whatever else was a lie, that love was real." "I know," I said, and I did. That was the complicated part. The love had been real, the family had been real, the memories had been real. But they'd been built on a foundation of deception. And once that foundation cracked, everything else came tumbling down. We didn't reconcile that day. Maybe we never would completely. But we started talking again, carefully, with boundaries firmly in place. She was still my mother, the woman who'd raised me, taught me, shaped me. But she was also the person who'd lied to me for 32 years. And that wasn't something I could forget or fully forgive. Today, 2 years after opening those DNA results, I have two families: the Morrisons, broken but slowly healing, and the Chens, welcoming and complete. Dad and I have dinner every other week. Emily finally had her wedding, smaller than planned but beautiful, and I walked her down the aisle because Dad couldn't bring himself to interact with Mom yet. Andrew's kids call me Aunt Rachel and don't understand why Grandma and Grandpa live in different houses now, but they're young enough that this will just be their normal. Richard and I text almost daily. We've taken 2 hiking trips together, introduced our friend groups, built a sibling relationship from scratch. David Chen sends me birthday cards and calls on holidays. His wife knows everything now, and while things were rocky initially, they've worked through it. Grace tells me I'm always welcome in their home, and she means it. I keep that DNA test kit, the joke gift from Emily, in a frame on my desk at home. Not the actual kit, but a photo of it, a reminder of the moment my life divided into before and after. Before, when I thought I knew who I was, and after, when I had to rebuild my identity from genetic truth. Sometimes I look at it and feel angry. Sometimes I feel sad. Mostly, I feel relieved. The truth hurts, but lies hurt more. They hurt slowly, insidiously, rotting everything they touch. Mom's lie destroyed a marriage, fractured a family, and stole 32 years of honest relationship from everyone involved. The truth, as painful as it was, at least gave us the chance to rebuild on solid ground. I'm Rachel Morrison Chen now, hyphenated, whole. I'm a data analyst with 2 fathers, a betrayed mother, 3 siblings, and a family tree that's more complicated than most. I'm the product of a secret that couldn't stay buried once technology caught up with deception. And I'm okay with that, more than okay, because I'd rather live in painful truth than comfortable lies. That DNA test didn't ruin Christmas. It revealed a ruin that was already there, hidden under 32 years of careful pretense. And sometimes, the kindest thing you can do is let the truth burn everything down so something honest can grow in its place.